hundreds of mutants in the Marvel Universe.
Some are packing more powerful punches than you might think. Scheming like a criminal ever since her debut is Lady Mastermind. She can create hyper-realistic telepathic illusions. One time, in Extreme X-Men 9, she created an illusion in Heather Cameron's head that Heather was stabbed, and Heather started bleeding through her pores in the real world. Her shirt was soaked with blood, like there was a wound, but nothing was actually there. That's creepy. She also convinced Heather's dad that he was drowning and he suffocated in a room full of air. People tend to believe the illusions, even if it comes with major changes in the environment. It doesn't matter, they feel that real. Plus, with everything going on in the Marvel Universe, getting randomly teleported is not that surprising to think. Mastermind also can make illusions exactly your worst nightmare because she can read your mind a little. It's limited telepathy. She can use her limited telepathic powers to camouflage herself and others, or make herself and others appear as someone else. In X-Men Volume 2, 193, she does this and makes an X-Men unknowingly eliminate their teammate. Even if you knock her out, the illusions will sometimes stick around. Big brain doing big things.
Next up, the Cajun sensation known as Gambit was one of my favorite X-Men characters when I was a kid. Remy LeBeau has the really cool mutant ability of molecular acceleration, allowing him to convert the potential energy of a non-living object through touch and kinetically excite the molecules to the point that they explode. Usually when a mutant has an ability that manipulates molecules, they have a pretty vast array of powers, but for Gambit, he mainly uses his abilities as simple attacks, charging up his cards or his bow staff. But in an alternate universe, there is a future variation of Gambit known as New Sun, who is what Gambit would be if he reached the full potential of his power. He can manipulate kinetic energy down to a molecular level, meaning New Sun can charge objects and living beings without being in contact with them. He can stop objects that are in motion and make still objects begin moving. He can turn into a wave of energy, letting him travel through space and other dimensions, and he was even able to defeat the Dark Phoenix in his own universe. Now we do see 616 Gambit use a lot of the same abilities as New Sun in a fight between the two in Gambit's 1999 solo series, but we won't likely see him reach the full potential of his powers again anytime soon.
In the wise words of Taylor Swift, Karma is a queen. Karma is also a telepath. She can read your thoughts and stuff, but her main ability is psychic possession. Karma overwhelms her victims' consciousness by sending them mental energy surges. It confuses their brain, and in that window, Karma slips into the driver's seat. She now controls your body like it were her own. She feels everything your body feels. You would enter a sort of like dreamlike state, and you wouldn't even remember anything after. Does she use this method for battling? Yes, but she could also really mess up your personal life if she wanted to. She can do this mind control thing with multiple people at once, but she has to switch from person to person. You can't pull an Uno reverse and mind control her. She has a psychic shield that she can throw up. I think what makes Karma extra powerful is that she could still win a fight without her mutant ability. She trained in self-defense with many military specialists. She spent some time in Vietnam and learned about guns and first aid, and then when her sister died, she got her multi-billion-dollar company. She has mutant power, firepower, and financial power. She's doing good.
John Paul Baubier is an interesting mutant with a few different abilities. North Star's main ability is super speed. Now, not really in the traditional sense of running really fast, rather, North Star can propel his body at superhuman speeds, becoming a living projectile, channeling a portion of the kinetic energy of his body's molecules in a single direction. It's even possible for him to reach 99% the speed of light in a vacuum, but if he were to do that on Earth or something, he'd not only damage himself, but could quite possibly break the entire planet. He can also super speed any part of his body, basically giving him superhuman reflexes and an incredibly fast metabolism to heal wounds. What's really cool is that since he is taking atomic motion from the molecules of his own muscles, they actually become closer and tighter, making him superhumanly durable as well, allowing him to survive moving at the speeds he does without tearing himself apart. He also uses his ability to fly by projecting the kinetic energy downwards, which in turn lifts him upwards. But in case that wasn't enough, North Star also has photokinesis, allowing him to generate a bright light, which, according to the wiki, is equivalent to 500,000 foot candles, which is an extremely weird frame of of reference, but he can also release concussive blasts that do some pretty serious damage, so, you win some, you lose some.
Our next mutant has powerful telepathic abilities again, and a god complex. His name is Game Master, and he has powerful telepathic abilities. So powerful, he actually needed cybernetic implants to help him control his power. What does he do with all this power? Well, he helped run a competition for mutants to fight each other to win a prize. Like a lot of power or something like that. Something tells me this guy would enjoy the Hunger Games trilogy and probably take notes while reading. He got to this point because he discovered that if he is able to really focus on a distraction like those games, then his mental load would be easier to carry. His mental load is a hefty one. He can hear the thoughts of every human on the planet, every living being, so maybe even animals, but that's also like 8 billion people. Their thoughts running through your head 24/7. That's a lot, even for the most powerful telepath. He can manipulate many minds at once, claiming to be able to control the whole world, but I think that was ultimately a lie. But with some training, I wouldn't rule it out. This guy is smart, but since he manifested his abilities at an early age and got no help in developing them, he doesn't have the best skill when it comes to using his abilities, which is probably for the best. He's pretty powerful as unskilled as he is, so it's in the X-Men's best interest to keep him at that level, unless he's on the team, of course. He does join the mutant nation of Krakoa in the end.
Next up, Phantom X, or Charlie Cluster 7, or Weapon 13, or John Philippe, or whatever you want to call him, was experimented on by Weapons Plus, and was genetically grown and evolved using Sentinel technology. Now thanks to that, he actually has, or had, 3 different brains for independent parallel processing. He had nanoactive blood, and his primary nervous system is actually a detachable techno-organism called Eva. So there's some stuff to break down there. Eva can fly herself and can generate bioelectric charges to be used as weapons, with Phantom X being both telepathically and symbiotically linked to Eva. His multiple different brains allow him to think like a sort of supercomputer similar to Sage, but it also gives him access to 2 extra personalities, a charmer and a super deadly mutant hunter. He can create extremely powerful illusions and enter a trance-like state where he can rapidly heal, and he has self-supremacy over his own body and mind, which allow him to overcome pretty much anything to complete his missions, including mind control. He has enhanced senses, is a dope fighter, and does not create any kind of smell, and for the longest time, as a kid, I just thought he was like a glorified super soldier. I guess I was wrong.
Did I include this next mutant because we share a name, and maybe more rare, the spelling of our name? Maybe, but that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve to be here. Amara Juliana Olivians Akia, or Magma, is from Nova Roma in Brazil, but eventually ended up at the School for Gifted Youngsters. Her big thing is geokinesis. She can control the Earth's tectonic plates. Sure, is it short-range control? Maybe, but the average tectonic plate is 125 kilometers thick, or 77 miles. That's no small feat to move that around and cause an earthquake or a random volcano. In New Mutants 12, she got essayed by a guy and was so mad she just poof, volcano in the middle of the beach. Good for her! The volcano, magma, lava stuff is called geothermokinesis. She herself has her magma form because the name magma had to come from somewhere. While in this form, there is nothing else hot enough to hurt her, and she is physically super bright. She has fire hair too. She can throw lava while in this form, and fire too, but the direct contact of magma seems to work better in her fighting style. If you come at her with metal anything, it will probably be a blob. When you leave, she'll melt it. The place she grew up in, Nova Roma, was a secret Roman colony, so they did still do some of the training they would have done way back in Rome. That means Magma can fight real good with swords. If all that wasn't enough, if she's hurt, as long as she can touch the ground or something hot, she has regenerative powers.
Next up is Sync. Sync has the mutant ability of power mimicry, meaning, kind of like Rogue, Sync can copy the powers of other mutants. But unlike Rogue, Sync has the benefit of not doing any harm to whoever he is borrowing powers from, and he can also do it without physical touch. Recently though, after being resurrected, Sync got a bit of a power boost, and he may even become a new Omega level mutant. In the story, Sync not only uses his normal mutant powers to replicate the abilities of the mutants Sunfire and Cyclops while they are both nearby, but it's also able to tap into Jean Grey's telekinetic abilities as well while while she is literally all the way chillin' on Mars. Sync's growth in power post-resurrection was first noticed back in 2021's X-Men number 18, with Sync documenting that he was now able to sync not just with mutants but other superhumans as well, which is quite the power boost, and I think it just keeps going up and up. In the House of M alternate reality, Sync even got to the point of permanently retaining others' powers, which would be an incredibly significant power boost as well. As a main member of the new X-Men, it's hard to be surprised that he is getting some power boosts.
Angel used to fly around and that was it. Well, not it. He and his wings were super strong, so he could definitely hold his own in a fight, but soon, to put this simply, he got a good side and a bad side. The good side is Angel, the bad side is Archangel. Archangel is a persona that craves death and destruction, so Angel really had to get that in check so he could stay with the X-Men. Archangel did bring a bunch of new powers to the table, like a hypersonic scream. It's what it sounds like. He screams so loud it can cause internal bleeding, which is fine, that's where the blood is supposed to be. To clarify to anyone concerned, that was a joke from a TV show. If you are experiencing internal bleeding, I would go to a hospital or get a blood transfusion from Angel. Yeah, Angel has healing blood now. Turns out if you get hurt and Angel is nearby, you are good, you're safe. He can drip some of his blood on your injury and it will heal up quick. For him, he just heals when he gets hurt. Love a good healing factor. The whole Archangel thing gave him techno-organic wings, so like metal wings with a bunch of weapons and combat-related uses that eventually go back to feathers. He's good at hand-to-hand combat and sword fighting and also business. He owns the company Worthington Industries and it's a Fortune 100 company. Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Jubilee's energy plasmoids might actually be one of the most potent of the X-Men's arsenal. The plasmoids aren't fireworks, even though they look a lot like them. They're actually closer to superheated plasma. She can create a bolt of bright light, but she can also push out enough power to bend steel or like destroy a tree. And with precision, she can even detonate microbursts inside someone's brain, so that's the amount of range we're kind of talking about here. But that ain't all. Emma Frost once speculated if wielded properly, Jubilee could potentially detonate objects on a subatomic level, meaning this unassuming mall rat could like cause explosions of atomic proportions. She's a highly underrated character in the comics and gained a lot of popularity in the 90s thanks to the X-Men TV show, and while she's gone in and out of having powers, she still remains one of the cooler characters in the X-Men's lineup, who is much more powerful than you might assume.
Everyone knows Emma Frost's diamond form, but did you know this wasn't the first ever secondary mutation to even appear in the comics? What? This secondary mutation is an interesting one for me, as I didn't know about it myself. I've never been deep in the know when it comes to Elixir, so it was cool to find out that something I thought was just a core part of his standard mutation is actually perhaps secondary. For this point, we're talking about Elixir's physical mutation, the golden hue of his skin. This change occurred shortly after his first appearance. Only a few issues later, he actually uses his powers to heal himself and his skin changes to a golden color. So it seems to make sense that I wouldn't know this was even a secondary mutation, since most of his appearances have been with this look. Joshua Foley, aka Elixir's skin, also changes color when he uses his powers to harm others, changing from a golden hue to a deep metallic black color. The changing of his skin is not something that Elixir also seems to be able to control, but instead is a mutation that is closely tied to his primary healing and death touch abilities. If your skin changed color anytime you did anything, what would you definitely want it to be or not want it to be? While many heroes have secondary mutations, let's not forget that this whole idea in terms of when it was classified started with Emma Frost, who herself was once a famous villain. Likewise, there have been other villains who have also gained a secondary mutation, but who simply aren't as well known. Enter Black Tom Cassidy, a classic mutant villain, and if you aren't familiar with him, you should be. He's pretty cool. His secondary mutation has changed somewhat throughout his history. It's been described as giving him the upgraded ability to channel his bioblast through his fists, as opposed to needing wood to channel said blast, which is what he originally had, giving him his own plant form, and giving him the power to manipulate plants and wood around him. Like many others on our list, Black Tom actually got this sort of secondary mutation from being mortally wounded, but yeah, it's changed changed a lot throughout the years in terms of exactly how it works or what it does. It feels weird to include Beast also on this list, but when I think about most people I know who love the X-Men, they usually always think of Beast as being default blue. Now this is because most of the people I know grew up with the 90s or early 2000s Beast after he'd undergone his secondary mutation. Many fans out there still don't know that Beast's original power set was just that he was like super dexterous. He just looked like a guy. He had big feet, big hands, and he swung around a lot. Initially, Beast looked like this guy, but after being exposed to a serum he created which isolates and boosts the X gene in mutants, he became permanently mutated again, gaining the secondary mutation of the blue fur. In fact, I think Beast may be the first mutant in comics to have developed a secondary mutation, before we even had a terminology for it at that time. He mutated. He's all covered in blue fur, which initially was actually like a gray fur, but that's a whole other story. That has to do with comics coloring and miscommunications and just how blues and blacks got often mixed up by people. With this next one, we're not talking about that time that Kitty Pryde was turned into a cat person in Wundagore, although that was a thing that happened. It was something though that she was given as opposed to an evolution of her mutant-based abilities, and it was temporary. With Kitty, or Kate, it's interesting as there are a few different instances where I feel one could argue that she manifested some kind of secondary mutation, or more specifically evolution of her powers. But this has also, I don't believe, ever fully been confirmed in the comics. Let me know if I missed something and if there is a page where someone says, this is a secondary mutation. I'd like to focus on the heightening of her powers over the years, which I believe is the version of a secondary mutation, as I understand what secondary mutations are, which can either be a significant power boost or it can be something additional. Some people, however, see secondary mutations as just something new and concrete added to a mutant's power set, like Emma Frost's diamond form, which exists separate from her telepathy. But it doesn't need to be that. And in fact, I think a major power boost does count, hence why I'm counting it. And if you don't agree, we can debate about it in the comments. Like when Kitty stopped needing to hold her breath while intangible, or when she was merged with the Black Vortex, becoming all-powerful, but then after giving up the Black Vortex's power, discovered that she had unlocked a new level of power through that, so after using it, it was kind of like an additional mutation. As I said, there are actually multiple moments for Kitty when I feel like this has happened, but those are the main ones that come to my mind. Speaking of folks who have seen major power boosts throughout the years, enter Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Iceman has had a few different moments like Kitty Pryde where I would say his powers have evolved, and which could be considered a secondary mutation as he severely leveled up. When he learned he could manipulate his body into more than just ice or snow and learned to use his water form. When he learned he could just become straight up ice. That was a whole thing, because before he was, I believe, covered in it. When he healed back up after having his ice form shattered. And when he learned he could make ice clones. Honestly, Bobby's just had a lot of moments because he's super OP. Sync developed a pretty powerful secondary mutation after he returned from the dead during the Krakoan era, so this is a recent one, so you might not know if you're not following with modern comics, or maybe you are and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the one I do know. His secondary mutation is more suspected, I would say, than confirmed. Well, we know he has this ability now, but we don't necessarily know if it is a secondary mutation or not. The ability in question is that he can now remain synced with other mutants even without being near them. I believe the idea is if he's synced with you once, he can kind of sync with you whenever, but of course there are some limits to this and we're still kind of figuring out how that works. I don't think that sync using those powers if you're not near him would be as powerful. However, this mutation also takes a toll on his body and it seems to age him faster every time he uses it. In addition to this, he can also sync with superpowered non-mutants as well, which is huge. As I said, the full extent of his newfound abilities has not been explored, and I don't know if everyone would consider them to be a secondary mutation, as they're still tied to the same power set, but I personally do. I believe secondary mutations can also manifest in a boost to a predetermined power set, and I think this should count. To me, it's a secondary mutation, so there you go. Take it or leave it. Cypher is another hero who went from being kinda lame to kind of insanely powerful thanks to his own secondary mutation. Honestly, I've become a pretty big Doug fan in recent years, now that I better understand just how powerful his power set can be. I think my love of Doug comes from me also realizing just as a person how important communication communication is in my everyday life, and how much I value being around other people who can communicate well, and also value my ability to communicate with them. When we can't understand each other, it actually creates big problems in our lives, and that's what I appreciate about Doug and his power set. His ability to communicate, and through that resolve so many issues without even needing to come to blows. In terms of his mutation, we saw him go from a character who could just understand all languages and communicate with people in that way, to someone who really understood the various minute types of languages around us that often go unnoticed, and thereby become a master of those types of languages as well. Things like technology, and even at one point physically fighting, which is a sort of physical communication or language and dance. This shift in his abilities happened after Doug died and was resurrected, and it honestly puts him on a whole other level, and really he's pretty powerful. I know sometimes we say, oh, communicating, is that powerful? Actually it is. I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it just very rarely comes up in the comics anymore. Probably because Quentin Quire no longer finds it interesting. At least that's the canon reason that we were given for this. Though I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I am surprised that he is bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. He is often unimpressed by some of the coolest stuff, or at least he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's secondary mutation here is a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he is known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet. Maybe that's why he was like, it's alright. I become like whatever, I don't have a physical form, but like, I'm pretty cool even when I have a physical form. Said to be the daughter of Unis the Untouchable, one of the earliest X-Men villains, Carmella's mutant power set is similar to her father's. However, at one point her powers evolved even beyond her own control. This seems to be a result of being exposed to Mother Vine, which triggered a secondary mutation in her. This mutation would cause her energy field to overcharge the more she used it, making it more devastating in terms of the damage it did to the people and technology around her. And if you aren't familiar with Unis the Untouchable, his main thing was that you couldn't touch him because he had a field around him that made it impossible to touch him. But this is also a field that blasts out in Carmella's case as well. What was worse, she had no control really over the power of her energy field, and she also suffered as a result thanks to overcharge resulting in a backlash. So when it happened, she would also be in pain as well. So she'd be causing pain to others and then also be like, ow. I mean, I know she's like a villain normally, but still, sucks, you know? That would suck, whether you're a villain or not. Something about people being in near-death experiences that seemingly allows them to evolve out of survival. Mask is another one of those mutants, and Mask was inherently more of a villain in the comics, and also a Morlock. However, being a Morlock wasn't what made him evil, because Morlocks are not inherently evil. What made him evil was his outlook on life. His mutant powers allowed him to alter the appearance of others, basically turning him into one of the world's most powerful plastic surgeons. But at the same time, Mask was considered himself to be hideous, hence why he hid in the underground tunnels of New York with the Morlocks and usually led them. And his powers did not work on his own physical appearance. That is, until he was killed by Shatterstar. To survive, he had to move his organs around, and this actually unlocked the power within him to manipulate his own appearance. For a while, he actually used his powers to appear as Marilyn Monroe, no I'm not kidding, while leading the Morlocks. Although now Mask has seemingly gotten over his obsession with beauty and chooses to mostly appear just as he is. A friendly reminder to love yourself, friends. Take a page out of Mask's book. Actually, at least I think that's what happened to him. I don't know, I haven't read every single Mask issue, so. But if there isn't a Mask issue where he realizes, you know what, maybe I should love myself as I am, there should be one. And if there isn't, Marvel, if you need someone to write it, I'll write it for you. I mean, if you know Axel Clooney, I think you know why I included him here on this list. Zeitgeist is most often associated with ecstatics. His power is that he can vomit up acid. Ew. He learned he was a mutant with powers in one of the worst possible ways during a makeout session as a teenager. Yeah. The girl he was with at the time survived, but he's never been able to remember her name, and as such, her presence haunts him. He's always wondered if remembering her name would help him to be less tormented by this moment from his past. Zeitgeist is not only weird, but I don't think he has the right attitude for the X-Men either. Sorry, Zeitgeist. Next up, Maggie is another mutant who is just straight up weird looking. In fact, when Alex Ross helped to create her along with Kurt Busiek, he helped to make her look even more strange than she was initially intended to be. Maggie was originally going to be a boy, a little green boy specifically, but Ross wanted her look to contrast even more more with Angel, who appears on the cover of this issue with her, flying with his angel wings out while he carries Maggie in his arm. Maggie makes her first appearance in Marvel's issue number 2. She was born with her mutation and because of this was abandoned. She has such a sad story in comics, and while I don't think we'd ever see her on the X-Men, also because, you know, she's a little kid and they don't normally have little kids on the team. Teens maybe, but usually not like infants. I would love to see her appear more alongside them, just because she has such a unique look and sad origin, and I'd love to see her grow up and like find happiness. Like, she doesn't have to be on the X-Men team, but I don't know, just be cool to see her like being mentored by the X-Men. This next one, Callisto, is too much of a rebel for the X-Men, but she also, for a while there, had tentacle arms, which is why I've included her here. She doesn't have them anymore, to be fair, but I thought that might be an interesting sight to see her recruited in the past, back when she did have her tentacle arms. Her tentacles, however, were not part of her mutation, but instead were given to her by the other mutant warlock, Mask, who can use his powers to change a person's form. Mask did this to torment Callisto, something he's done multiple times throughout her past, both by making her beautiful and by making her less than. And if you're wondering how do you torment someone by making them beautiful, it's because she's usually scarred, and he's like, no, you don't have a scar, and like, ha ha ha. Although really, I was thinking, I was like, I feel like Callisto's like, yeah, okay, good prank, I'm gonna go be beautiful, I guess. Alex doesn't have a fancy code name like Maggie either. He is one of the babies we saw in Inferno, the original Inferno, not the new one. His mutant power looks like it's similar to Glob Herman's. Honestly, I love Glob, although it sounds a little bit more useful than Glob's. But while Glob is a bizarre mutant who is well loved, Alex is tragically mostly unknown. I bet you didn't know about him before this list. Ergo, he is both weird and not someone I would imagine being on the X-Men. Alex has a goo body, which he can control, which basically makes him like a living, walking, gelatinous cube from Dungeons & Dragons. Except I don't think he disintegrates those he takes inside his form. Instead, he can only suffocate them, or he can simply engulf them to like just move them somewhere else, immobilizing them for a time. This next one, Cell, is a weird one, which I guess fitting on this list where we got a bunch of weirdos. He kind of reminds me of Maggot, honestly, but if Maggot didn't like have his maggots, his body can fuse the cells of his entire form so that they become one singular cell. This allows him to absorb damage without being hurt, basically reinforcing his form. He can also turn into a liquid-like state as well, and he can also emit ooze that is basically like acid, allowing him to burn those he comes into contact with, digesting them in essence from the outside. He was part of a group of Chicago mutant warlocks and appeared in the miniseries by Jeff Johns and Sean Martinborough titled simply Morlocks. If you know me and what I usually like to talk about on this channel, then you know I'm a pretty big Peeper fan. Peeper is Peter Quinn. My first ever experience reading about him was during Messiah Complex, and from that moment on, I became a fan of his. This might seem odd to you if you read Messiah Complex. Now this might seem odd to you considering that in that story, he calls X-Factor to report that he's basically being followed, and he's soon after attacked and killed by Predator X. When Siren later arrives on the scene, it is implied that it is a very gruesome one. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel very much like everyday characters. Also, if you're worried about Peeper, don't be worried because he later on just shows up and he's like totally fine. I don't think we've ever gotten an explanation for that, but somehow he's fine. I know it seems like he died horribly, but he apparently didn't. He just shows up later and it's never explained, in case you were wondering. So he's good. But I just tend to gravitate towards the mutants who feel like very everyday characters, I guess. They might not be the ones in the main books, but for some reason, that's what I like about them. Maybe it's because it makes them feel more grounded in reality or relatable. After all, none of us on this planet are superheroes, and while some people might have abilities that make them seem that way, or might be heroes of a kind, superhero is not something that usually intersects. Characters like Peeper make me feel more seen in a comic. Like Peeper, I too had my own villain era, but am always striving now to be more of a hero in my own way every day. Peeper's powers aren't anything crazy. He has basically superhuman vision, which allows him to see further away, and which also allows him to see like closer up than normal human eyes can see. And while I feel some folks may have forgotten this one in recent years, he can also fire optic blasts, and mostly his eyes just kind of bulge out of his head. His optic blasts, though, I think are lesser strength and like lesser skill set than Cyclops. I feel bad for this next one. We're talking about Amber. She got one pretty cool story where she is clearly established as a college kid who just wants to live her life, and despite being immune, doesn't really let this define who she is or what she's capable of. And then, right after, we think, think, wow, that's cool. Amber could be a really cool character to follow along, just even in a slice of life story, or especially if she was pulled into becoming a mutant hero. But no, she gets depowered during M-Day. Or at least that's what I believed happened. I'm not sure if it was ever specified. A lot of people were depowered during M-Day, and she's one of the people that we believe was depowered. I don't think she's ever specifically seen after her adventure with Jono during her appearance in his Chamber series. It was a mini-series, only a few issues. Amber was definitely weird to behold because her default physical mutation made her green and covered in spikes. But she was actually a shapeshifter who typically shapeshifted into a beautiful woman in her dreams. But she also could control this ability and just shapeshift, I think, pretty normally. I think she just mainly preferred to just appear as she was, which honestly, super cool. Kinda like Mystique, but what if Mystique wasn't a baddie and just wanted to chill and go to college? Which I kind of love as a story. While a student at the Xavier Institute, I don't believe this next mutant, Slick, ever made the main X-Men team, nor has he been featured on any spin-off mutant team either. Slick's powers were charisma-based. He basically exuded charisma and made himself likable. He could also cast illusions, as we later learn when he and Quentin Quire's kid Omega butted heads. The two didn't get along, and of course at one point, Quire used his powers to dispel the illusions that Slick was constantly casting. Now these illusions made him appear as a handsome young man, but this was not actually his true appearance, as it turned out. He also had a physical mutation and appeared as a small, web-footed creature with pointed ears. Kind of impish looking, if you want to imagine that, but I'm sure we're showing you a picture right now. After having his true appearance revealed at the moment when he was working on a song with his girlfriend Tattoo, she broke up with him. Maybe not because of his appearance, maybe more because she was like, you didn't even tell me this. I didn't even know this is what you look like. Slither isn't just a weird character, he's also a bad guy, which is why he would probably never join the X-Men. But if he was a hero, I'd be surprised to see him on the main team. For the most part, I'd say that mutants on the main X-Men roster tend to be pretty normal looking. In fact, many of them are also very pretty looking. I think for the most part, this is because the X-Men are meant to be a premier superhero team, serving not just the mutant community, but also the world at large. We don't usually see people with significant physical mutations on there. I mean, Beast is big and blue, but he's also often likened to a giant teddy bear. And even with mainstay Beast, he started out looking just like a normal person pretty much, save for his oversized feet and hands before he went through his secondary mutation. Slither also literally looks like a snake, which I'm sure would make having to save people who are afraid of snakes, a pretty common fear amongst many people, a lot more challenging. And finally, Cool Million. 1, Cool Million is a villain. 2, he is the most 90s I've seen in terms of his character design. And 3, his name is Cool Million. So yeah, I don't think he'll ever be making the cut for the X-Men, ever. Cool Million operated as a mercenary in the comics and at one point was hired to work for Hydra. His mutant power was apparently psionic and that of persuasion, but he could only persuade people while maintaining eye contact with them. However, I don't know, it could have been lasting. I'm you do this, and then you go off and do it. But I like to imagine that you have to maintain eye contact the entire time, because that's funny.
I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. That's a fun phrase, so why not make a character out of it? Does it sound like a weird idea? Yeah, that's probably why Marvel wants us to leave Ice Cream behind. Ice Cream's mutant ability is turning himself into any ice cream, even a banana split. If you leave him in extreme heat or cold too long, he's gonna either stay melted, unable to solidify again, or will freeze totally solid and can't move. He was in Obnoxo the Clown in 1983 and literally was not seen until 2023. In X-Men Before the Fall, Mutant First Strike, he is giving out ice cream at a celebration. He just gives out ice cream, he doesn't do anything else. It seems like he's a character Marvel brings in for fun, but not for us to remember long term. Evan Daniels, better known as Spike, was created for the animated show X-Men Evolution, and that's pretty much the only place he is. There was a version of him brought into the comics, but that guy was loosely based on Evan. There were backstory similarities, but that was pretty much it. Spike's powers have to do with his bones. He can create bone spikes anywhere on his body and then throw them at things. He later created bone armor that was self-repairing and could use his spikes to climb walls and stuff. His weakness is loss of calcium. Regrowing your bones all the time and throwing them around means his calcium levels are low, so he drinks a lot of milk. Poster Child Forgot Milk campaign. I know that his weakness is that he has to replenish with milk, but I think that can also serve as mental warfare. If I was in the middle of a fight with someone and instead of water they stopped and took a swig of milk, I'm off my game. That would haunt me forever. Every time he throws his bones, we don't see a wound, so he probably has some sort of healing factor. The character has good bones, figuratively and literally, so why isn't he appearing in the mainstream comic universe? Well, his power set is quite similar to the pre-existing character Marrow, so that unfortunately might have something to do with it. The last time he was seen was 2003 in the finale of the show. Robin Vega appeared in Spider-Man 82 and 83 in 1997, and that's all. Literally nothing since then. She is a mutant, but maybe since she wasn't in the actual X-Men comics, Marvel has pushed her away. Her mutant ability is metal mimicry. She can make herself metal. It's living metal, so she can move and stretch her body parts around and even make her limbs weapons. She can melt herself down into a liquid or stay solid, it's up to her. And because she's metal, she's bulletproof. The powers are super cool, which is why Marvel has used very similar ideas with other characters. They're not exactly the same but different. Other metal mutants include Colossus, Mercury, and Flex. So the market is pretty saturated. The Spider-Man 83 comic ended with her literally just running off. Well, there are a few people out there who still remember her. It looks like Marvel might be sweeping her under the rug. She hasn't even been featured in more recent comics as one of those cameos of forgotten characters. Combo Man has shown up twice. Once semi-seriously, and the other was poking fun at the character. Combo Man was created because of a promotional agreement, which means he's really weird. The agreement was between Marvel, of course, and Eagle Snacks. He is a combo of a bunch of different Marvel heroes, and that means he has all their powers too. Combo Man is the hero. The human inside of him is Rick Wilder. Rick was a kid and he turns into Combo Man when he was near a lab explosion. Rick happened at the time to be carrying a Marvel comic book and Eagle Company snack brand Combo Snacks. Of course, these two things combined with Rick and he is now Combo Man. If you want to check it out, Combo Man has one issue, it's just called Combo Man. His only other appearance was in Ziggy Pig Silly Seal comic at a Comic-Con in a back alley alongside a bunch of other weird forgotten Marvel characters. I count Combo Man as a mutant because quite a few mutants were part of the lineup that created him, like Cyclops and Magneto. Changeling is known for a few things, but you might maybe remember him either pretending to be Professor X or Elvis. Yeah, the Changeling's mutant ability is shapeshifting, but specifically the metamorph strain, as he is limited to humans. He had basic telepathy, but that was then boosted by Professor X. He used to just be able to influence people, now he can read minds and make you think his thoughts. Professor X boosted him, and he pretended to be Professor X because the real Professor X needed to go prepare to fight an alien invasion. But Professor X couldn't just disappear, so enter Changeling. He did die as Professor X and was buried as Professor X. It was when he was brought back as a zombie that we got the Elvis moment. Zombie Changeling was helping out She-Hulk by providing a distraction, and that distraction was Elvis. He then went 6 feet under again shortly after. Changeling was revamped with a new name in some other universes. He became Morph, and he got a lot more character development and, sorry, but more interesting plot lines that he got to be himself in. It seems Marvel wants the Changeling version to be left behind and Morph to get picked up instead. Coming in all the way from Hollywood is El Guapo. He was a mutant stuntman. He worked on X-Statix, the movie, which is also the name of the real-life comic series. El Guapo appeared in X-Statix 9 and then perished in issue 18. Here for a good time, not a long time. Marvel might want us to forget this mutant because the guy didn't, really have powers. Instead, he had a symbiotic relationship with, take a guess, not a symbiote. Good guess though, he's attached to a skateboard. A flying skateboard. It moves at his mental command and sometimes it even fights him. When El Guapo cheated on his girlfriend, the board beat him up and was later his cause of death. He was impaled on his skateboard. It's all a little ridiculous, so it's not much of a surprise that Marvel has left El Guapo alone after his death. I feel bad for calling the mutant Ugly John, so I'm going to refer to him by the name he introduced himself as, Steve. Steve is a mutant with 3 faces, that's all. No powers, just serving face. Since he doesn't really do anything, it's understandable that he hasn't been revived since his tragic death in New X-Men 115. His first appearance was New X-Men 114. He wasn't around for a good time or a long time, poor Steve. The last early mutant standing without the help of Resurrection is Gabriel Shepard. His character is pretty interesting. He's a proto-mutant, an early version of mutants whose X gene was less evolved. There weren't many of these guys to start out with, and Gabriel was the last one standing as he looked the most human and was the most powerful. The other proto-mutants had been getting revived to be used as weapons, and Gabriel found out by reading the mind of an X-Men, and he was not happy. Like, he dispersed himself into pure energy, unhappy. This guy is super powerful. He was thought to maybe even be an Omega level mutant. He is immortal, he has super strength and hearing, has telepathic abilities, and can stop you from using telepathic abilities on him. He can fly, he can manipulate matter to make it something else, healing powers, he, like a power plant, he can generate electricity and even stop time. Like, that is so many things. Why isn't he a bigger deal? I raise you. Does Marvel want us to forget him, or is the omnipotent Omega level mutant using his power to make us forget him? When you look at it, the poor guy just seems to want to live his life out of the spotlight. He's been around for hundreds of years. He had to have known about the X-Men, yet he chose to stay hidden. He doesn't really want to use his powers. Maybe we should forget about him, just to let the poor guy rest. I did a video on the history of Magneto recently, and in that we briefly touched on the Magneto clone Joseph. He really had us all convinced he was the real Magneto for a minute there. In his defense, he was a clone of Magneto and he had amnesia, so he did his best. Joseph just is Magneto. Everything Magneto can do, he can do too. He also does his best at causing problems. He's died a few times, but then again, so have most Marvel characters. The first time he was resurrected, he framed Magneto for eliminating a bunch of people. He tried to bring Magneto back to his reign of terror. He's resurrected again after dying again. He keeps impersonating Magneto. It seems that Marvel only remembers and wants us to remember Joseph when they want to bring Magneto back without bringing Magneto back. Remember, Magneto died, actually this time, but then Magneto was spotted. Oops, sorry, that was Joseph again. Joseph was also already dead, but it's easier to just bring him back apparently. Irina Clayton hasn't been seen since her single panel appearance in Legion of X9. She was only there for a second though. Don't get me wrong, she slayed, speaking literally and figuratively. She got a total redesign, so if they hadn't explicitly said it was her, honestly, I wouldn't have been sure. She's a lot scarier now, but that's just because of a monster spell, so hopefully it's not permanent. Her mutant ability is extra mouths on her neck. The extra mouths let her project her voice so it sounds like she is everywhere. I want to know if she can sing in 4-part harmony, because if so, she should have gone into show business. Maybe that's what she was doing, because honestly, Irina doesn't do that much. Like, for the most part, she's just a student at the school that appears in the background. She did help confuse some people who were trying to break into the school, but her appearance in Legion of X is the first time she actually gets her hands dirty, that we get to see at least. This panel also confirms that she does sing. Wouldn't it be wild if she was gone because she was a backup singer for Dazzler's World Tour or something? Anyway, Marvel really must want Choir gone because they made a new one. Seriously, the mutant known as Scream changed her name to Choir, quite recently too. I guess Irina is really being put on vocal rest.
At number 10 is Quentin Choir, aka Kid Omega, who's a prime example of an Omega level mutant who strayed down the dark path of villainy. Initially nurtured by Professor Xavier, who hoped for his potential, Choir's journey took a sinister turn. He formed the notorious Omega Gang, a group hell-bent on mercilessly attacking and, in some instances, unaliving non-mutants. What's truly remarkable, or perhaps terrifying, about Kid Omega is his status as not just an Omega level mutant, but a beyond Omega level mutant. His powers transcend the boundaries of mortality, allowing him to persist even beyond physical demise, an ability that he's exploited multiple times. But here's a twist. Quentin Choir's mental instability wasn't solely his own doing. He was a pawn in the grand scheme of Sublime, the true architect behind this nefarious substance that further warped Kid Omega's mind and corrupted his gang members. At number 9 is Mr. M. Mr. M is a name shrouded in enigma who holds a unique place among Omega level mutants who walk the thin line between heroism and villainy. This dude's abilities encompasses an astounding array from the psionic manipulation to telekinesis, telepathy, and the awe-inspiring power of energy manipulation. But his story takes a twist that mirrors the complexity of the mutant world itself. See, Mr. M's descent into darkness was triggered by a chilling prophetic vision, a harbinger of his transformation into a destroyer. You see, he believed that salvation for his cherished mutant town, a place he'd adopted after years of wandering, lay in eradicating all sickness and corruption. His intentions, albeit misguided, were fueled by a deep desire to protect his home. Though he ultimately failed in his quest, past, Mr. M remains an anomaly, one of the rare mutants who retain their powers after the cataclysmic M-Day event, leaving us to ponder the intricate interplay between power, purpose, and the blurred lines of heroism and villainy. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing the notification bell. At number 8, we have Shadow King. Shadow King was born from the darkest recesses of human consciousness, and is a complex and formidable Omega-level cosmic entity turned villain. Emil Frank, the mutant vessel for this malevolent entity, who's the mutant in question, possesses the power of telepathy that rivals even Charles Xavier. His psychic dominance extends beyond the ordinary, effortlessly manipulating formidable telepaths like Marvel Girl and Psylocke. But their true menace lies in his ethereal existence, requiring a host body to manifest in the material world. This parasitic attachment grants him extraordinary powers, but also vulnerability, as the demise of his host can disrupt his astral essence for extended periods. The Shadow Man's sinister history includes collaborating with Baron von Strucker to destabilize Britain before the Second World War, aiming to reshape global politics. His awareness of future events, the rise of the X-Men, and Charles Xavier adds a layer of intrigue to his villainous persona. The Shadow King's multi-universal presence and insidious abilities make him a formidable adversary, demonstrating the dark potential of Omega-level mutants when they fall into villainy. At number 7 is Magneto. Max Eisenhardt, also known as Magneto, stands as one of Marvel's most complex characters. See, initially he embodied the quintessential mutant villain, diametrically opposing Charles Xavier's dream of mutant-human coexistence. Magneto, who was a survivor of World War II, witnessed humanity's darkest facets, making peaceful integration unimaginable for him. Instead, he advocated for mutant supremacy in a genetic war, perceiving humans as the adversary. However, Magneto's narrative trajectory defies simple classification. See, he oscillates between adversary and ally, often leading the X-Men himself. His dynamic character extends to his role as a father, overseeing the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which evolved into a morally ambiguous faction. In contemporary storytelling, Magneto leans towards anti-heroism, driven by a fierce commitment to mutant protection. This complex evolution reflects the rich storytelling potential within Omega-level mutants, challenging the traditional hero-villain paradigm in the Marvel Universe. At number 6 is David Richards. Omega-level mutants are the creme de la crop in the mutant world, who usually stand as defenders of both mutants and humanity. But then there's David, a sinister twist in the narrative. He never reached the godlike heights of beings like Mad Jim Jaspers or Hyperion, but make no mistake, he's no ordinary mutant. Sentinels were like playthings for him. He manipulated Blink, teleportation virtuoso, into a macabre dance of suffering with thousands of innocent lives on the line. He's like, okay, imagine Professor X and Magneto and the Phoenix Force rolled into one malevolent entity, and you've got David. Thankfully, David himself never fully harnessed the Phoenix Force, but his penchant for terrorism sent shivers down spines everywhere. At number 5 is Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff, also known as the Scarlet Witch, embodies the complex nature of Omega-level mutants gone awry in the Marvel Universe. Initially aligned with her father Magneto in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, she and her brother Quicksilver transitioned to heroism by joining the Avengers. However, Wanda's tumultuous history is marked by her struggles with mental instability and reality-warping powers. Her pivotal role as the antagonist in the Avengers Disassembled and House of M storylines underscores her capacity for destruction. Notably, she dismantled the Avengers, rewrote reality during M-Day, and committed mass unalivings against Earth's mutant population. These cataclysmic events highlight the pearliest consequence of when an Omega-level mutant's powers are unhinged by personal turmoil. At number 4 is Omega Red. Before you all go yapping in the comments about how this dude's probably a beta-level mutant at best, he was described by Dazzler as an Omega-level mutant at one point, so I'm gonna try to defend him because he's actually really cool. Born Arkady Gregorovich Razovich, I definitely butchered that, I'm so sorry, in the depths of Soviet Russia, his past was veiled in darkness. There are interpretations of his origins where he was a mass unaliver, captured because his town was really small and there wasn't very many victims. But instead of facing justice, Razovich was handed over to the KGB for a sinister experiment, an attempt to create a super soldier akin to Captain America. The result was Omega Red, a mutant wielding superhuman strength, stamina, agility, and reflexes. His body also exudes lethal hormones, aptly named lethal spores, which can swiftly extinguish the lives of ordinary humans. Yet this is just the tip of the iceberg. Implanted within his arms are retractable carbonadium tendrils, formidable weapons capable of ensnaring victims or lashing out like deadly whips. His endurance is staggering, allowing him to battle foes including Wolverine Marine for hours without fatigue. At number 3 is Legion. Born from a secret union between Charles Xavier and Gabriel Haller, his early life was marked by tragedy and obscurity. A survivor of a brutal attack, Legion's latent mutant abilities were abruptly awakened, which intertwined his mind with the consciousness of Jamail Cabril, one of the assailants responsible for the attack. The subsequent psychic battle between his fractured psyche raged for years until he fell under the ominous influence of the Shadow King, which we talked about earlier. Under this malevolent puppeteer's control, Legion became an unwitting agent of chaos, committing heinous acts that fueled hatred and division. Eventually, when he briefly regained control, his actions still remained misguided. His attempt to fulfill his father's dream of human-mutant coexistence by assassinating Magneto backfired catastrophically, thrusting the world into an early revelation of mutants and leading to Xavier's tragic demise, thus leading to the entire events of the Age Apocalypse timeline until Bishop managed to rewrite history again by unaliving Legion himself. At number 2 is President X. In this alternate universe, Charles Xavier, who never established Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, decided to become a politician instead. Yup, that's all it took for Xavier to become the polar opposite counterpart to his 616 version, becoming completely wrathful, cruel, and a sadistic tyrant desiring nothing but total control over everyone around him. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, y'all. Though he's never revealed to be a mutant himself, it's speculated that Xavier's telekinetic abilities aided him in tracking down mutants across the nation. A stark contrast to his 616 counterpart, this Xavier exhibited a cruel and authoritarian rule, causing protests, notably from billionaire Anthony Stark. The catalyst for change arrived as Stark formed the Avengers to counter Xavier's regime, but unfortunately, Xavier's response proved devastating as a missile targeted the Avengers' Quinjet, obliterating its occupants. This tragic loss included iconic figures like Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and wait a second, he took out Thor with the missile? Okay. With the big players gone, Xavier's oppressive reign expanded further, with all mutants confined to a grim prison in Texas, subjected to his psychological torment and horrific tendencies. And at number 1 is Vulcan, also known as Gabriel Summers, who emerges from the tangled web of mutant abilities as a formidable figure, overshadowing even his renowned brothers Scott and Alex. His tumultuous upbringing, marked by neglect and isolation, set the stage for his unparalleled powers. Unlike Scott's optic blasts or Alex's energy conversion, Gabriel possesses the astounding gift of energy manipulation and absorption, seemingly boundless in its potential. But what sets Vulcan apart is his ability to vicariously absorb vast quantities of raw energy and retain it within himself like a cosmic reservoir. This stored energy can be wielded at his discretion or redirected as needed, making him a walking powerhouse. In the annals of mutant classification, Vulcan has transcended traditional boundaries, earning him the elusive title of Beyond Omega Level from discerning minds like Rachel Summers. The Summers bloodline, it seems, has birthed not one, but 2 extraordinary mutants, with Rachel herself as a testament to the family's unparalleled genetic legacy.
And at number 10, telekinesis. This is a common power thrown around in the world of superheroes, but can you imagine if it actually existed? Being able to move objects with your mind has long been a topic of discussion by scientists, and there's even been odd anomalies of real-life people explaining that they can actually do this. Evidence for how and why, though, is very sparse. Telekinesis defies the laws of physics, so for it to exist in our world on the level that it does for an Omega mutant would impact everything we believe about science. The idea of telekinesis being possible is something we can't even comprehend. Some in the psychic community have brought up that paranormal events of people seeing ghosts, move things around, could actually be the manifestations of our own spiritual energy being unconsciously released on it. However, even the concept that we have spirits is still a heavily divisive topic in the scientific community. And at number 9, telepathy. This concept of power that we often see mutants using is another human discussion about the possibility of it existing in our reality. What's really baffling about this mutant Omega level power is that it's never been a topic of discussion until the 20th century. We hear occasionally about stories of people being able to read minds, and many mentalists sell the idea that they have harnessed this ability, but in reality, science denies its existence. It's defined as the transmission of thoughts over some distance without the use of any kind of technology. It is a kind of wireless communication between 2 human brains. Again though, scientists hark back to the laws of physics as to why its existence wouldn't make sense. The ability of telepathy isn't plausible because no section of the brain is positioned to act as a receptor for long distance communication without the use of technology. And at number 8, energy manipulation. This is the ability to manipulate energy from one form into another. Some magicians magicians have used this phenomenon of energy manipulation to make blindfolded people believe the magician is touching a portion of their body, and by directing them to focus their attention on the body, the end result has been astounding.
If you felt a touch, please raise your right hand.
We do understand energy manipulation to some extent in regards to electricity. We know that this energy can be distributed and transformed into everything around us. However, in terms of phenomenons like the way that Omega level mutants manipulate energy, it's something that cannot be observed, tested, or measured in any way, meaning it is virtually impossible for science to explain how it would work. In at number 7, weather manipulation. Weather manipulation is often referred to as weather modification, and the only way that we can understand it is by seeing a plane seed clouds to increase rain or snow. However, in terms of the way that, say, Storm can use her mind to manipulate the weather into whatever conditions that she wants, it is very confusing and something we will never be able to understand as humans. In at number 6, power manifestation. This is the Omega power that Legion, the child of Professor X and Gabrielle, seems to have inherited. Not only did Legion take on his dad's telepathic gifts, but his dissociative identity disorder allowed for multiple personalities to each manifest its own powers. The very concept, though, of being able to use mind over matter to manifest power is very woo-woo subject matter in the science realm. In fact, true supernatural powers being manifested into a human has never been proven, and most obscure cases of moments of super strength, say, are attributed to a spike in adrenaline rather than a power that you've always had deep down and just haven't found a way to harness. In at number 5, matter manipulation. This is the ability to manipulate the particles that make up the matter and bonds between them. In 1990, IBM engineers manipulated atoms using a scanning tunneling microscope. They arranged atoms on a metal surface to spell IBM. This is interesting that we were able to manipulate matter, but again it was through the use of technology, so it's no wonder that this method could be explained. What could never be explained is a single individual being able to change the particle structure of an object using their mind. It is truly a science fiction mutant power. In at number 4, magnetism. When looking at this Omega level mutant power, the first person who always comes to mind is of course Magneto. Although Magneto does so much more than just bending forks. Magneto has control over electromagnetism. This is one of the 4 fundamental forces of the universe. Magnetism, though, is one aspect of the combined electromagnetic force. It's the physical phenomena of objects either repelling or attracting. Human magnetism, on the other hand, which is the main category to explain Magneto, is still an alleged ability in the real world. Most people who claim to be a human magnet also believe that their body can attract other materials. This claim, however, disrupts the explanation that they have a magnetism power and implies that there is a different kind of physical effect that's occurring. In at number 3, reality manipulation. So many of these powers are impossible for us to understand because of all of these scientific laws that we have in place to understand our reality. So reality manipulation would certainly throw everything we know out the window. When an Omega level mutant uses reality manipulation, it is a very powerful force. It gives them free reign to break the laws of physics and invent their own, which then is imposed on everyone living in said reality. We have altered our reality on a physical level if you consider the industrial age that saw humans building machines and cities to change the reality of everything from war to travel to how we live our everyday lives. On the level of breaking the laws of physics, though, that becomes much more confusing to comprehend. In at number 2, temperature manipulation. Bobby Drake, or Iceman, is one of the OG X-Men that can manipulate his own body temperature to create ice and even enclose his body within it. A state of being that, if possible in the real world, 1, could not be explained, and 2, would surely kill anyone who attempted it. We manipulate our home's temperatures with devices like the air conditioner or a furnace for heat, but to change our own temperature at a moment's notice would be much harder for science to explain. I mean, you can adjust your body's internal temperature, but if your core temperature dropped even by 2 degrees, your brain would just shut down from the hypothermia. Last but not least, in our number 1 spot, biokinesis. This is the ability to control and change one's genes by simply using the psychic powers of the mind. Omega level mutants such as Elixir have exhibited this in the past, showing off the ability to change the pigmentation of his skin. The difference between this Omega mutant and us, though, is that Elixir has complete control over his own organic structure and even those closest to him. He has really put this power to the test, displaying the potential for him to be able to bring people back from the dead even. In reality, though, there is no explanation for people who claim they've changed their eye color by using this psychic ability. In most cases, these folks are clickbaiting the internet into believing it's possible if you just believe. Science, on the other hand, says otherwise.